Coming up, the major wins and losses in the Super Tuesday elections, and the BIA's 200th birthday in our IndigiPolitics segment. Plus, the Western Shoshone Yale professor who is a finalist for yet another prestigious prize. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines ahead on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Hopa. Thank you for joining us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. We start our reporting today in the Northern Plains, where buffalo hunt traditions are alive and well, but with some modern twists. ICT's Amelia Schaefer has more from the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota.
Traditionally, Lakota people on horses would hunt enough buffalo to feed the camp all winter. On this day, hunters and trucks aim for one, but each hunt began with a ceremony.
It's not as how it was back then, but I try to keep it as close as I can to that, which of course, like yesterday, we had a sweat because that's part of the preparation.
It was actually a ceremony that was performed for the young, I want to say the young men, but young women have also done hunt in the past, and that was to teach them about honoring and respecting the spirit of the buffalo, and how that, and from the very beginning of time, how we did a close relationship with the Buffalo Nation. We call them Pte Oyate, or Buffalo Nation.
Kelly and Yellow Hair work for the Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation, a nonprofit dedicated to uplifting through tradition. This January's hunt was the first for one young man, and it came with lessons to apply throughout his life.
So the teaching behind that, so they didn't just wantonly kill the buffalo, they actually honored the spirit and utilized every part of the buffalo. And so to teach that to the young man, being his first kill, and then also the teachings of generosity and sharing, the buffalo meat with the elders, the widows, and the orphans, that taught him generosity and respect.
Amelia Schaefer, ICT News.
In Nebraska, a new bill would ensure the voting rights of Native Americans are being upheld if it is passed into law. The creation of a state voting rights commission would study barriers to voting access for the state's tribal populations. The new commission would exist within the Nebraska Commission of Indian Affairs and would work with a consultant who is an expert in tribal issues. Already, natives in Nebraska have low voter turnout rates due to geographic isolation, non-traditional mailing addresses, and poor roads. The commission would be required to submit an annual report that would propose ongoing policy recommendations to the legislature beginning December 31st of 2025. In Minnesota, Tribal Nation has wrapped up its groundbreaking campaign aiming to educate an entire state about Native American people. The Shakopee Midwankaton Sioux community has ended its $5 million project Understand Native Minnesota. Over nearly a 5-year span, it gave a total of $2.3 million in grants to teachers and even published 27 episodes of a podcast. The curriculum included the most essential information about Native people and tribal governments in the state. It all started when the tribe's secretary and treasurer, Rebecca Crooks Stratton, was spurred to action after her daughter's social studies project asked what Native Americans eat and where they live. The tribe, which owns a leading casino, is one of the largest philanthropists in Minnesota. The state's lieutenant governor praised the efforts.
It's been a tremendous gift to the people of Minnesota, and I am so grateful for the work. And they've really given us a foundation upon which to build into the future. So it is bittersweet that it is wrapping up.
Well, an ad campaign in California is highlighting the cultural importance of Indigenous migrants in a big way. 8 new billboards in Los Angeles showcase Latin American culture and languages used by Indigenous migrants. According to the Indigenous language advocacy group called Cielo, an estimated 17 different Indigenous languages are spoken in LA County. The purpose of its campaign is to change the misperception that Latin-based Indigenous people only speak Spanish. The billboards display messages that read, "I speak Mije" or "I speak Zapoteco" in an effort to make LA's language diversity known among local institutions and service providers. Well, a groundbreaking and fearless leader has died. Veronica Homer from the Colorado River Indian Tribes was the first female to lead the National Congress of American Indians in 1977. Her legacy in leadership is long. She was the first Miss Indian Arizona in 1961, and she served as vice president of her tribe for 10 years, starting in 1969. Homer was a founding member of We Win, the organization called Women Empowering Women for Indigenous Nations. According to her niece, she died Monday at her home in Parker, Arizona, after a long illness. Veronica Homer was 80 years old. This week on IndigiPolitics, we preview President Joe Biden's State of the Union address, the Bureau of Indian Affairs' 200th birthday, and yesterday's Super Tuesday. ICT political correspondent Pauly Denetclaw is here to talk more about this with regular contributor Holly Cook Macarro. She is the founding principal and president of The Angle and also a board member of Public Media, the parent company that owns both ICT and the ICT Newscast.
Hello, Holly. Welcome back to the show once again.
Hi, Pauly. It's good to see you.
So let's start first. State of the Union is tomorrow. And last year, President Joe Biden, in his 72-minute speech, mentioned tribes once and didn't talk about any tribal-specific issue. Will it be the same this year?
Well, if I wouldn't hold our breath for much more than that. It's extremely rare for a president to discuss any tribal specific issues or priorities or make any announcements like that. I think what we normally end up getting is that one mention in a list of communities, right? And back in the day, I remember when even that used to be a victory. So, it is time to move on. I do think that, particularly given the high-profile role and possibilities for the impact of the Native vote, that tribal issues should be at the top of the president's priority list. Tomorrow night will be an extremely high-stakes performance for him, given some of the recent polls reflecting concerns both within and outside of the party.
And the Native vote did get Biden elected. And what could he say at the State of the Union address that would bring in this voting bloc?
I think mentioning at all the importance of the government-to-government relationship and a support of tribal sovereignty and self-determination, some of those basic tenets of what the federal government and the president can do would bring, I think, a level of recognition. And even just a simple sentence like that would raise the level of education across the government. So I too await that day when we get a significant and prominent mention within the State of the Union.
And moving toward our next topic, the Bureau of Indian Affairs is a 200-year-old institution on Monday. And as we look forward into the future, how could the BIA be reformed in order to promote tribal sovereignty and self-determination?
I think we talk about intergenerational trauma in our communities, and lightly, I think there might be some intergenerational trauma within the department as well, given the history of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, starting first in the Department of War, and then moving for 25 years it was there, and then moving over, and that Department of War became the Department of Defense. And so then with the BIA moving over to the Department of Interior when it was established in 1849, and just the evolution from the Commissioner of Indian Affairs to the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs. And some of that evolution is very recent to, the director of the BIA and that title holding for the last 20 plus years or so. and that division of work between political and the career employees. But I really think that all of the knowledge and expertise of the federal government on Indian country issues shouldn't just be within the Department of Interior. And so I think continuing to elevate and raise, we have the interdepartmental cabinet established by the White House that convenes regularly, but we still see areas of our federal government, even in friendly administrations, that are unfamiliar with tribal issues. The Department of Commerce, for instance. But some of these agencies that do not have as much experience working with tribes, it would be great to see the Department of Interior or any administration really push to have required interdepartmental consultations on all tribal issues.
And Super Tuesday, as we mentioned earlier, was yesterday, and there were actually 2 Native candidates who ran for the state assembly in California. Can you tell us the results for those candidates?
Sure. We had current State Assemblyman James Ramos from San Manuel in Southern California, who's been a longtime member and had been a local elected official prior to that. He, when I checked, his opponent was a write-in candidate. And so when I checked this morning, that write-in candidate hadn't registered on the scale yet. So it appears as if James Ramos will have a safe cruise to re-election in the general. And up north, Frankie Myers from the Yurok tribe, which is a very different, down south, it's very urban, and certainly a different set of issues. Up north in the 2nd district, Frankie Myers from Yurok ran a difficult race. It was a crowded Democratic primary. And he really, I think there was covered, we had coverage last week about how he struggled to kind of break out of that pack. And I hope that he runs again. He had a strong voice and a strong platform. And that's what it takes, is really, trying again. Most folks don't get it on the first try. But Frankie came in 5th out of a field of 6 Republicans with about 10.8% of the vote. And I wish him well and hope to continue to see him active in Democratic politics up there.
And why is it so important to increase Native American representation in the California State Assembly, and what difference would it make?
Not just in the California State Assembly, in any state legislature, having those voices, I've spoken to our elected officials who note the importance of not just showing up at the vote, but also being on the ballot and at the table, so that we can add our voices when policy discussions are made and when decisions are made. And so that education level, that experience that Native Americans bring inherently as from our communities and knowing our issues, that level of expertise, when we do not elect Native Americans to assembly, to Congress, to the presidency, then that expertise and knowledge is lost in the conversation.
Well, Holly, thank you so much for joining the newscast again. It's always wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Pauly.
As we just heard there, it was primary election day yesterday in California. Among those on the ballot was Yurok Vice-Chairman Frankie Myers. The Democrat had hopes to become the state's 2nd Native American assembly member. Election results are still being counted, as I just mentioned, but ahead of the race, ICT's Paris Wise asked him about his campaign experience and about the lessons learned.
I've been inspired by so many people to run for office throughout my life. I've had amazing mentors who have helped guide me through my career. I will note, though, it was Assemblymember Ramos, California's first California native elected to the state legislature that really kind of pushed me over the edge. Having discussions with him and seeing the work that we've done in California to really elevate tribal issues and issues as a whole, I think was really what was the tipping point to say, okay, let's throw my name in the hat and let's give it a try.
Why is it important, not just to tribal communities, but to government as a whole, to have natives in positions of authority?
I think one area that we can see the importance of having diverse perspectives in our state legislature is our catastrophic wildfires that we see here in California throughout the district. They've been devastating and throughout California, costing lives, obviously, as well as damage to our ecosystem and our economies. When we look at the reasons or the problems that led up to our catastrophic wildfires, one of the major ones is really the lack of small prescribed and cultural burns that had sustained and maintained our environment for thousands of years. Now, that is singularly something that is a tribal driven issue, one that we are trying to bring to the forefront. If, say, 100 years ago, when my grandma first had the right to vote, we would have had someone in the state legislature, we could have melded those laws to ensure that prescribed burn and cultural burning was a part of our forestry management practices to avoid the catastrophe that we're in now.
You are running as a Democrat in that area that has a substantial amount of Republican voters. How has that affected your approach to voters in Assembly District 2?
The demographic of Republicans and Democrats and independents in Assembly District 2 is not unique to me. I live here in the Klamath Basin, and as a part of the work that I've done to restore balance back to our ecosystems and drive our economy, having to work with diverse groups of people is what I've been doing. We have an upper basin and a lower basin, a wide array of folks, both Republican and Democrat, that I work really, really well together on. I try to look past party preferences when we're discussing our communities and really try to drive forward these community-driven initiatives, really talking one-to-one and talking about values that help drive a more holistic kind of governance that we like to propel at Yurok, and I think is much needed in this district.
What have reactions been like from your family and from your tribe to your running?
I think it's been pretty phenomenal across the board, the reactions that I've gotten from my family and my community. It's obviously a very big step, and it's a different kind of lane to be working in with outside of tribal government, but have felt an overwhelming amount of support from our own tribe, local tribes here in the district and throughout the state, and honestly throughout the nation as well. It really has helped fuel our campaign. Getting so much input and so much support from our folks has been overwhelming at times and phenomenal. It definitely feels like something that is in the right place at the right time.
You were involved in the Klamath Dam removals in order to improve salmon restoration efforts, and dam removals should be completed by the end of this year. What is your hope for the Klamath River and its wildlife in the next coming years?
I've been working on the Undam the Klamath campaign since I was a very young person, seeing how far we've come. To hear those words now, it hits, right? It makes me filled with emotions to think by the end of this year, we will have a free-flowing river in the Klamath Basin. I hope that we will continue to see the improved water quality for our juvenile out-migrating salmonids, our returning salmon. It's really the cornerstone of our holistic restoration efforts. And I continue to tell people, dam removal wasn't the goal. The goal is holistic restoration. Dam removal allows us an opportunity that we see many people taking advantage of right now, going out, doing the upslope work needed, the wetland restoration work needed for the new salmon to be coming for habitat. It's been phenomenal to see how much work is laid out in the next 20 years. I see that being continued, and I'm very excited for the restoration of not just of our salmon, but our people as a whole.
Vice Chairman Frankie Myers, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
Yale historian Ned Blackhawk has won the National Book Award for his work, The Rediscovery of America. Now he's a finalist for yet another award from the J. Anthony Lucas Prize Project. That comes with a $10,000 prize. We caught up with him after the National Book Award win. Check it out.
I'm just thrilled beyond belief. And also last week at the National Book Awards, there was a major prize bestowed by Ojibwe author Hyde Erdrich to a Chamorro poetry finalist who won the National Book Award in poetry, Craig Santos Perez. So Craig and I constitute 40% of the recipients of the National Book Award last week. That's kind of a historic moment. There was a Native American judge, Hyde Erdrich. So there are also a lot of Indian peoples at the event. So it was really kind of revelatory experience that hopefully kind of signals that the publishing world, like contemporary Native American media in so many ways, is starting to get transformed by Native authors and writers.
Sir, I wonder if you would summarize your thesis in this book for our audience.
I'm happy to do so. My book is entitled The Rediscovery of America, Native Peoples and the Unmaking of U.S. History. And it actually has a pretty simple thesis, which is you can't understand the history of the United States without its Native American and Indigenous populations. The book has that kind of simple argumentative claim early on. It recognizes how indebted the project is to a generation or so of scholars who have all been working really diligently and effectively at rediscovering American history. That's where the title comes from. It makes another claim that in order to understand the centrality of Native Americans to U.S. history, we have to unmake the conventional paradigms that have often excluded or marginalized Native Americans. And so to do so, to give you some examples, I divide the book into two halves, part one and part two. And the first half of the book examines what I call part one, Indians and Empires, which is the centrality of Indigenous peoples to the evolution of European imperial societies across North America. And it ends with a substantive chapter on the Revolution and then on the Constitution. And then part two opens essentially the second half of the book, which is another 6 chapters, which is generally titled Struggles for Sovereignty, where I locate the challenge of federal Indian affairs at the heart of the evolution of the 19th century American state. And so that second half starts roughly around the time of ratification of the Constitution in the late 1780s and goes to the present. And 4 out of those 6 chapters are largely about the 19th century world. So the 20th century receives 2 significant chapters that overview the kind of first half of the 20th century and the second half, using the Second World War as a primary demarcation. So in each of these sections, we could talk about the Civil War, we could talk about the evolution of the French Empire, we could talk about the Spanish settlement of the Southwest, the emergence of Indian activism in the early 20th century that bred the Society of American Indians, which pushed forward the American Indian Citizenship Act, which we'll be commemorating next year. In each of these areas, it's undeniable that Native Americans were central to the course of American history.
You call the Native Americans in California the first casualties of the Civil War.
Correct.
And you also talk about the Revolutionary War as being prompted by Native issues on the frontier.
Correct.
These are different ways of seeing what are the central parts of every high school American history course.
Right. And it is a big undertaking to rediscover American history. And I do say early on that it's going to take generations for this to kind of come into really full formation. And the claims about the Civil War are a little less kind of there's a little less causation there than in the Revolution. And so I just observe, based on the scholarship of other people, that the federal government starts funding California's state militias after the South secedes in 1860 and early 1861. So before the Battle of Bull Run, before really the major battles of the Civil War are unfolding, California state militias, which had previously been receiving state funding for their atrocities essentially against Native Americans or campaigns against them, now receive federal funds. And so why can't we think of these campaigns as part of the Civil War, since federal funding was at the heart of those initiatives? So that's just kind of one example but it doesn't have the kind of causation. I'm not saying the Civil War started in California, although the incorporation of the West was the central feature of the causation of the war more broadly, as many would know. But I am saying in the Revolution chapter that the articulation of anti-Indigenous ideologies and ideas, which make it into the Declaration of Independence, the last grievance of the Declaration of Independence is against the King of England for inciting merciless Indian savages to attack our frontier inhabitants. And those terms, merciless Indian savages or frontier inhabitants, come from not Virginia, at least not Eastern Virginia, not the gentry classes that Jefferson and Washington were from, or Madison and Monroe as well. They're not coming from Boston, where Sam Adams and other kind of merchant leaders are operating busy seaport economies. Those are frontier concerns, and they're coming from the interior. And I spend a lot of time in that chapter kind of arguing that from the aftermath of the 7 Years' War, which ends in 1763, to roughly the late 1760s, a very distinctive anti-Indigenous ideology has formed that is animating settler grievances against not just the Crown, but Native Americans. And there are massacres and battles and other kind of forms of frontier rebellions, essentially. And I call them settler militias that are erupting across Pennsylvania and other backcountry regions throughout that fateful decade. But those have not been seen as central causes of the revolution. And so the subtitle of my chapter on the revolution is called The Indigenous Origins of the American Revolution.
Sir, that's fascinating. Thank you very much for your time today.
It's been really a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to Indian Country today.
That is a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.